Welcome into Hail to the podcast here on Maize and Blue Review. I'm Brandon Justice, one half of your show today. Joined by me, as always, is Josh Henschke. And everyone knows what's at stake on Saturday and what's at stake during the show as well. And that is breaking down Michigan and Michigan State. Battle for Paul Bunyan will take place once again on Saturday under the lights at Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor with a 7:30 p.m. kickoff. Both teams experiencing opposite trajectories, as we know. Michigan undefeated, 7-0, firmly in the playoff conversation. Their pathway to a playoff is pretty simple: win and you're in. Whereas Michigan State struggling quite a bit, 1-3 in the conference, 3-4 overall. They are fighting for bowl eligibility. They lose this game, they're a loss away. The Wisconsin game was seismic for them and their chances to get to a bowl game. Beating Michigan would more or less secure it, which I know the stakes don't sound high there, but a win over Michigan and then positioning yourself for bowl eligibility would be about all Michigan State can root for at this point as far as season success goes, given the record they currently have. But with nothing to lose for Michigan State and with everything to lose for Michigan, the question then presents itself like we hear every year. Is this game one to worry about if you're Michigan because of the rivalry, because of the intangibles, because of the annual mischief of reality that always occurs on the field when these two teams face off? Nothing really matters. Jake Butt, former Michigan tight end, talked about it earlier this week on a podcast. He said that hand, foot, and mouth made its way around campus the week of Michigan State in 2016, and a bunch of these starters on the team were affected by it and were sick throughout the week. And he said that they had to quarantine the week of that Michigan State game in 2016, and that was this game a bit similar to 2019, but 2016 was similar to this season and that 2019 season because Michigan was coming off of a loss to Michigan State like it is this year, but it is far more superior on paper and so far through the season, as that was the 3-9 Michigan State team in 2016. And this could end up being another edition of that. So with all of that in mind, we will break this game down, talk a bit about it and what we expect to see on Saturday. But before we do that, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Michigan Rivals, on Instagram, Maize Blue Review, TikTok, Maize Blue Review, and be sure to subscribe to the YouTube if you're on it right now, or if you're watching on Facebook, make sure you like us and subscribe to our feed. And if you're on Twitter, please follow the show at Michigan Rivals. And if you're brave enough to follow me on Twitter, my @ is right there, and the same goes for Mr. Henschke. Speaking of the devil, Mr. Henschke, how are you? What are you thinking about? What's the vibe like for you surrounding this game on Saturday? Seems like a bit of a weird rivalry week. There really just hasn't been much chatter, no bulletin board material from either side. Seems like a bit of a slow burn and a slow early wake to what could be a chaotic night in Ann Arbor on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think the bye week didn't help too. I mean, we're talking about, hate weeks here, multiple. So, I mean, unfortunately, both teams are coming off the bye too. So it's not like one team is fresher than the other. But yeah, I mean, it's been, from everyone that I've been speaking to all week, I mean, it's been a very business-like approach this week. And it has all season. I mean, it's not like this is a one-off approach where they're, going all in, but, they're taking this game extremely seriously, as they should. But, they do treat every game the same in terms of preparation. Like, this is a business-like approach. This is another opponent, a nameless, faceless opponent that they have to get through in order to get to where their goals are. However, this game does mean a little bit more. I mean, it doesn't take me to tell you that for everyone to understand that, this game is means a little bit more than the rest. And they know that and they understand that. And, these guys want to win badly. I mean, after last year, coughing up a lead late, a second half lead, in a game that they should have won, that stung and that continued on with them, the entire year. So this is one that they've had circled for a long time, and in a game that they're taking, extremely seriously. It's, as I said, it's still a business-like approach. The approach necessarily hasn't changed. It's just, it has a little bit of, extra moving parts to it with the rivalry and what's at stake. So, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt this team's going to come in ready. They're going to come in prepared, and they're going to come in pissed off too, which is maybe a little bit of a difference from last couple of years, but I don't think the pissed off attitude is the ultimate game changer when all is said and done. But it certainly doesn't hurt by any means. So yeah, this team, they like what they're doing in terms of their game plan. They feel good about it. But when do they don't feel good about it? But still, this week is they feel good. The approach is there, and yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to come in, more than ready and amped up for this. What should be a really good atmosphere too.
A little bit of a preview and a look at what both teams are bringing to the table on Saturday. We know the records are opposite, and thus the metrics are a bit as well. Michigan is unequivocally being evaluated and projected as anywhere from a 19 to I've seen as high as 25.5 point point better team. Now that sounds like the spread, but this is something that gets misconstrued by people and I think people kind of have a misconception about how it works. And if you see lines in Vegas and you're wondering where these lines come from, they start with people who are projecting the scores, and then they're using models to combine together a bunch of different metrics, scoring, finishing drives, et cetera, a bunch of analytics that come together and come out to project a power ranking, right? So it's similar to like S&P Plus, if you're familiar with that. Well, there's a dozen of those out there. And by a dozen, I mean there's like a million. And there's a couple that are more reputable than others. Obviously, ESPN has its FPI, which has its flaws, and all of these have their flaws, just the same that the human polls has its flaws too. But all the same, Vegas really, if you look at projections, Vegas pretty much launches its lines based off of a bit of a mean of what those projections are saying. And now they'll lean on certain models more than others, of course. But that's where Vegas gets their lines from. Tyler Shoemaker, who is an odds maker I follow, and he's a Buckeye guy, but has a very reliable model out there that projects these numbers week by week. So last week he was projecting Liberty, who was a 10-point underdog according to Vegas. He was projecting Liberty to lose by I think 2 or 3, and they ended up winning outright by like 30. So a nice model that is reputable, that has some credibility, and it has Michigan as a 25.5 point favorite. That's not the line Vegas is using, but all the same, there are projections out there that are going as far as to say that. Now, with that in mind, S&P Plus only makes Michigan out to be, I think, right around 20. Even on a home field, I think it's like 20. And right now, the line's at 23, and you're getting closer to that key number. And this isn't the betting show, so we won't do a whole lot of betting talk, but just to understand how the public, not just the public, but how sharp bettors and bettors in general are seeing this game going. There's key numbers, right? Anything in between those two key numbers is just floating. So we're not going to dive into the nitty gritty of that. Just understand that Michigan is anticipated to win by anywhere in between 21 and 24 points. That's the most basic way to put it. I could get into the nitty gritty, but we won't do that. Just understand that Michigan is expected to win by that many on Saturday, which when you hear the information you're about to hear, it kind of makes sense. Michigan is like unequivocally better than Michigan State in just about every facet. Sitting here looking at the grades by PFF, and there's certain things PFF does well and certain things they don't. But one thing they do well is how they grade out the defenses and the offenses. And for Michigan, I mean, offensively, their overall ranking has been above 85 twice, and that was only against Hawaii and Connecticut. The rest of the season, they've been under 75, besides against Indiana, where they were at 78. Against Penn State, they were 74.3. That's the best 74.3 offensive performance I've ever seen.
Yeah, right.
But all the same, Michigan State, on the other hand, offensively, they've been bad. 4 straight games where they've been under 70, but 3 of those games are under 65. They were 69.1 against Washington, which was the better of the group. Or I'm sorry, I had that messed up. Wisconsin, they were 74.2 offensively. Of course, that was a double overtime game, and that aids to it. But against Maryland, against Ohio State, and against Minnesota, Michigan State really struggled. So we're going to see a Michigan State team that we're trying everything we can to come up with as to why and how they're going to challenge Michigan based on the metrics. But what we're going to do for the purpose of this show is follow along with what the coaches have been telling us all week, and that's that none of this stuff really matters in this game. So we could sit here and tell you how Michigan's 100 spots better in so many different metrics, which they are. I mean, Michigan, the only candle Michigan State can kind of hold to Michigan at this point is tackling. They're not bad. Michigan State's not the worst tackling team, right? Penn State was like below 100th, right? But Michigan State, not as much. Aside from that, Michigan's better than Michigan State in every facet by a wide margin for the most part. But we'll throw that out the window, and we'll focus more on what we know and what we've seen from Michigan State, the weapons they have and how they might attack it. And we're going to kick metrics aside for a bit. Now understand, if we're talking metrics, there's a stark difference here. Stark. So I guess, Josh, what are some of the factors that go into a game like this where you know you're unequivocally better and you know you have every right to beat the brakes off the team that's about to walk in, but you know that how this game has gone over these last few years. I mean, the last time the Spartans walked into Michigan Stadium as 20-point underdogs, they won the game outright. Now, granted, two totally different teams, 2020, yada, yada. Either way, it's happened before, right?
Yeah.
Trouble with the snap has happened before. Last year happened. There's so many different things that have, and Jake Butt mentioned something that nearly hurt them in 2016, right? So what are some of the factors from your perspective where Michigan can help itself in this game by not doing it, whatever it may be, maybe being over emotional, maybe not being emotional enough.
Yeah.
I know there's obvious ones like penalties, but just some of the things that stick out to you about a game like this that can be X factors between the two.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with emotional and the mental aspect of it too. I think it sits with you. Like the Ohio State hump sat with those guys. I mean, it's something that gets discussed every year. Hey, when are you guys going to beat Ohio State? When are you guys going to compete, nationally? So it's the same thing kind of with the Michigan State hump. It's a mental thing. You got to get over that mental hump, and you can't be too emotional in these games. I mean, yeah, you can be emotional leading up to it, but when it comes to these games, you got to control your emotions, because each side is going to try and jab you and twist the knife a little bit to get you to react. And we all know the reactionary the reactions are what is going to get flagged. And so you got to control your emotions in that regard. It's also a mental thing where you have to find the killer instinct. When you get up to these big leads, you can't coast. You can't cruise. You can't let teams, especially a team like Michigan State, you can't give them belief that they're going to come back. Because that's where they do their best work is when they're doubted, when they're when they're counted out and all that stuff. The whole disrespect, chip on the shoulder thing that Michigan State used to do so well under D'Antonio. There's just you got to find the killer instinct. And, I don't think they've found that killer instinct yet during Harbaugh's tenure. You can talk about that. What was it? 2019 year when they won by like 20 plus. I mean, that was probably, just that was a beatdown,
Right.
On a bad Michigan State team. And that was probably the one time where that they've actually put the foot down and not let up. It's performances like that is where when you get up big, you can't cruise. You gotta keep going. And, I think that's the big thing, is that you gotta shut the door on Michigan State early. You can't let them linger. You can't let them, carry a sense of, hey, we're in this. Let's do this, because we've seen so many times weird things happen in this rivalry, and we don't need to rehash old wounds and things like that. But we've seen it before. There's tangible evidence of, you give them an opening and they're going to burst right in and take it from you. So I think the big thing is that Michigan's got to find, and again, this all draws back to a mental aspect. You got to find that killer instinct when you have the jump on them. You got to stay jumped on them. You got to be on top of them, and you can't let them loose. You gotta shut the door on them. And I think Michigan is equipped to do so this year. Out of any other year that Harbaugh's here, I think they're actually equipped to really open up a can this year. And the question is, can they do it? I think, there's going to be opportunities. I'm going to post a comment here on the site or on the page here. It says you can't throw a 5-yard pass if a 40-yarder is open from username blank name. Yeah, you gotta take advantage of what you have. I mean, if they give you an opportunity to throw it deep 40 yards, you got to take advantage of it. You got to do it. You got to complete it. You can't leave the door open for Michigan State to get back in this. I mean, they have, their passing offense is probably the best that Michigan has seen so far. With Jaden Reed and Keon Coleman. So that'll be a good test for guys like Green and DJ Turner. But again, if you shut down Michigan State's major forms of moving the ball, you're going to have a great chance. And it all comes back to the mentality. You got to shut them down. You got to take advantage of the opportunities that you're given. You can't afford to drop picks. You can't afford to, you got to jump on fumbles when they're there. It's just one of those mental blocks that Michigan hasn't been able to break through the last couple of years. And when they'll have, I fully believe they'll have an opportunity. There'll be a point where, okay, if you do this, then their will is going to be broken. And they can do it early. That's the thing too. It's like, we talk about this whole thing with Michigan State, like they're better than Penn State, but they're not. And so this is a team that's arguably worse than Penn State. And look what Michigan did when they finally decided to, they wanted to take control of this game. The opportunities are going to be there. You just have to take advantage of it and put them away early. That's it. Just put them away early, and you can, enjoy the rest of your second half, celebrating a win if Michigan gets up to an early lead and maintains it.
So I know we said we're going to throw numbers out the door, but just to give people an idea of what's going on both sides. So not to prove any points here, but just a brief overview of basically what each team is doing coming into this game from an offensive and defensive perspective. Michigan State's offense is scoring 20 points a game to Michigan's defense, which is allowing only 12 points per game, one of the better marks in the country. I'll get the exact number on that briefly here in a moment. But yardage-wise, 349 a game for the Spartans, 250 being allowed by Michigan's defense, 242 passing yards for the Spartans. Michigan's defense only giving up 164 passing yards a game. And this might be the most telling of all of them, is that Michigan State's rushing offense is only averaging 106 a game. Would love to look at, and I'm sure I will look at, what that compares to from last season. So Eyes on the Enemy, of course, is our complete opponent preview. That'll be out tomorrow, so be sure to look for that. I think that'll be a telling part. Michigan's rush defense only giving up 85 yards a game. MSU only mustering 106 as it is. We know Penn State only had 20 last week or 2 weeks ago. So when teams can't run on, when you can't establish the run and all you can do is pass, that's very problematic against any team, but against Michigan, that's extremely problematic. On the flip side, Michigan State's, let's see here. There it is. Sorry. Michigan State's defense is allowing 27 points a game. Michigan State's offense, 42 points a game. Michigan State 422 yards. Michigan's defense is, or Michigan's offense is putting up 473. So we won't go into any more. I mean, that pretty much says enough, right? Like they're giving up 422 a game. Michigan's getting 473. They're giving up 153 on the ground and 269 through the air. Michigan's at 231 and 241. And here's another one for you. 43% of third downs against Michigan State's defense are being converted. Michigan converts 49.4 of them, nearly 50%, which is a pretty absurd clip. So that is an idea of how like separated these two teams are, in reality. Now, what happens on Saturday? Again, like previewing this game is a bit of a headache. Like I say that without trying to discredit anything, I guess, regarding like I love my job. I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing, but it's a bit of a headache because like we can sit here and it's like breaking down Michigan versus Indiana. Like it's very similar. Michigan State ranks pretty low in everything. They have 3 wins. Their 3 wins aren't great. The Wisconsin win, of course, is good. Well, Indiana had Illinois, so it's just one of those things where these two teams, although maybe Michigan State's more talented than Indiana, sure, I'll agree with you there, but like how they compare to Michigan, extremely similar. So that is where we're at going into this game. Again, just we're making similar points, more broken record-ish in that Michigan is unequivocally better than the Spartans.
Yep.
But there's still plenty of things to talk about. So let's talk about how Michigan State might attack Michigan, and this is kind of how I see it going. You already mentioned Jaden Reed. Well, Michigan has a flaw. Michigan's defense has one big flaw, and that's its linebackers and pass coverage. We've known that throughout the year. We saw that most evident against Iowa, I would say, where they allowed. Now, I want to make it clear, like a lot of people are making a point that because Michigan allowed 243 passing yards against Iowa, that CJ Stroud's going to go for like 750 against Michigan. But if anyone watched that game, like, yes, Iowa had more passing success than it should have, and that was because of what they were doing, leaking out the running backs and the tight ends on a lot of the play fakes. But if you watch the second half, Michigan ran a prevent defense and kept everything in front of them and allowed Iowa to throw as many chip shots as they wanted to, as long as they weren't making the big play. And again, they scored a touchdown with a minute and a half left in the game, Iowa did, and drove down the field with Michigan. They had their second team in. So, it's a bit of a flawed number. But all the same, Michigan's linebackers have not been good in coverage. The best ranked or the best graded pass, the best graded linebacker in pass coverage for Michigan is Michael Barrett, who's like 140th among qualifying linebackers, and Junior Colson, who's the better and the best linebacker in the room. Granted, young, but still the best and most talented. He's below that, over at 190, I think 191st. So they don't have good coverage from their linebackers. And a guy like Jaden Reed can blow that up. I know he's a deep threat, but if Michigan State opts to use him more underneath and gets him in the middle against a lot of what Michigan does with its linebackers, which is blitzing, then you're going to see a lot of crossing routes work out for them, maybe some mesh concepts and some easy stuff for Peyton Thorne to kind of chip. Because here's the thing about Peyton Thorne. I know he hasn't had the best season, and I know that Michigan State's had a rough year, but he's coming off a game where he played pretty well. I mean, Peyton Thorne had, I think, 243 yards against Wisconsin. Let's see here. Yeah, he had 243 yards against Wisconsin. So he's coming off a really good game. He's been playing good. Yeah, he's 265, and he went 21 to 28. So he's 75% completion percentage, throwing at almost 10 yards per attempt. And he had 2 touchdowns and no picks against a Wisconsin team that's, lauded for its defense. So there's some things to account for in this Michigan State offense. So I guess my question to you, Josh, and we haven't really talked about the defense much, that their strength is more so their interior, and Michigan counters that well with their O-line. But I guess between Michigan State's defense and Michigan State's offense, which unit do you think is the one that can make the difference in this game and could keep Michigan State in this game? Do you think it's an even balance of both, or do you think one has an obvious, more advantageous shot at giving Michigan a counter that would work?
Yeah, I think I get the sense that they're going to come in and sell out completely to stop Michigan's running game, because we haven't really seen what Michigan is when the running game is shut down. You can kind of mention that Iowa, that they weren't exactly, efficient on the ground. Indiana, it wasn't exactly efficient until the end of the game. Oh man, got the hiccups here. At the end of the game, but we haven't seen what happens when Blake Corum is just effectively shut down, and Donovan Edwards as well. I think that they're going to come in and do that? No, but I think they have the guys and the ability to kind of limit the running game a little bit, at least at the early stages, because Michigan the offensive line does such a good job of wearing out offenses, or wearing out defenses. Just with their attack, they chip away, and then finally they find that crack that just just disassembles the whole thing. And that's when Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards go back-to-back touchdowns, for 60 yards. So I don't get the sense that they will just effectively shut down the run game all game, because I think Michigan, just the way how they operate on offense, they're going to keep the ball. They're going to keep Michigan State's defense on the field. But, I have no doubts that the defense is going to sell out to stop the run. And that brings up the point too, is then, we all know, the big talking point about Michigan State's defense is they can't defend the pass. And so, what happens there? Do you try to, play the game more equally, where you can, you're trying to do both, to stop the run or the pass, and then give up a chance to, have Blake Corum run all over you? Do you stop the run and then allow your pretty bad coverage corners to get thrown on by some experienced wide receivers and JJ McCarthy? Or do you try to stop the pass and defend and leave kind of, allow Blake Corum and Donovan to do what they do? So it's kind of a deadly combo there, a damned if you do, damned if you don't. So that's another reason why I think Michigan's going to be successful against Michigan State on Saturday. But I think the one big thing that they've got going for them is they have a really strong front seven. Jacoby Windmon is an NFL player. There's no doubt. So I think they've got enough cavalry there to at least make an impact on what Michigan wants to do in the run game early. I just don't think they'd be able to sustain it, because I just think Michigan's offensive line is just so good, and it does such a great job of just wearing people down. So, I mean, and there's plenty of points to make on offense, especially as you mentioned, linebackers as well. There's opportunities there for these short little quick passes, because Michigan State's wide receivers are so quick and good that they can, get out on you for big gains. But, I think the Michigan State's defensive side, their defensive game plan is going to be telling here of what they want to do. And I think that's ultimately going to be the big decider in this one of whether they can make things interesting, whether they shut down the run game completely, or whether this is just going to be a complete blowout.
Starting to look more and more like the latter, the deeper we dive. But again, I mean, if Jim Harbaugh is telling you to stop paying attention to the numbers, you probably take that advice, because this one's just tough, man, because the more and more we talk about it, the harder and harder it gets to make a case for Michigan State. But I mean, I do think that they have the personnel to give Michigan fits, just because of the speed and athleticism they have offensively. And if they can get out into space, they're able to do some things against Michigan's linebackers in coverage, where I think that it's becomes redundant, is that if Michigan kind of keys in on that, I don't know what else Michigan State can counter that Michigan does, because the pass rush is strong for Michigan and it's creative. So it's not just relying upon the tackle play, which I haven't been able to look at the film close enough to see how good or how bad Michigan State's offensive line play is. I mean, PFF doesn't think it's that bad. I mean, the pass blocking has been relatively good against Minnesota. The pass block at a 92.5 grade. I mean, that's pretty awesome against them. Unfortunately, against Ohio State at a 58.8 grade, and against Wisconsin at a 51.8 grade. So I don't know what to make of it, and, against Washington, 77.9. The run blocking's been terrible in conference, 59, 54, 56, and 54 against Big Ten opponents that are formidable. Against Maryland, I got a 75.7. I should add them in there too. But aside from that, pretty bad, right? So what can they counter against Michigan? I think, again, like what we talked about with the linebackers and coverage, but if Michigan keys in on that, where do they go? I don't think they're going to be able to protect Peyton Thorne enough. I don't think Michigan – now, it kind of all comes back to this. Like at the end of the day, Michigan State's probably going to 50-50 ball this to death, and they're going to
Yeah.
live or die by that. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. That's what this game is. This game is a 50-50 ball, right? Like that's what it's pretty much become for Michigan State. So I think that's what they're going to and inevitably embody on the field. They know that this game is there's nothing to lose. If they lose this game, no one's going to think differently about what they thought before Michigan State walked in there. Everyone knows they're a bad team. That's not going to change. Now, if Michigan kicks the hell out of them, that's one thing, right?
Yeah.
But if they can walk out, and I know we always kind of like make fun of Michigan State for the whole defeated with dignity headline from a few years back, but like realistically, like that's their best case scenario this weekend is that they walk out of there with that. Now, of course, they want to win the ball game, but as far as like realistic things go, if they don't win the game and they lose by 17, I don't think anyone's going to be upset. I don't think Mel Tucker's going to be fired, right? So,
yeah.
With that in mind, it kind of all goes back down to that 50-50 ball. They lived and died by that against Wisconsin, and it worked for them. And they could have won that game 10 times before they inevitably did, but all the same, it worked for them. And it's what worked for them in 2020 when they came into Michigan and beat them. It's all Rocky Lombardi did all day was throw 50-50 balls. I mean, we saw some of the best coverage Jamon Green had that year in that game and still could not. It just like something was in the air, and that's how this game goes. It sounds silly. It sounds storybook. It sounds cliche. It sounds like we're just trying to create a narrative, but there's always something weird in the air in this game. So I think Michigan State, ultimately, we talk about all these things that they can do, which there are very few. I think ultimately they go to those 50-50 balls as their best chance at a win in a game that feels like a 50-50 ball itself. Aside from that, what does Michigan State do good? Again, pass block's not bad. The receivers are really good, and the defensive line is really strong. But despite the defensive line being really strong, the rush defense isn't great. And I don't know if they're just not getting help from their edges, if they're not getting help from the corners. Again, haven't been able to dive into the film enough to like gather those things quite yet definitively and make statements that are going to hurt me in the long run. But it's just one of those things where like they had a 44.7 rush grade against Ohio State. How's that going to translate at Michigan Stadium against Michigan? Like not great, probably. Mm-hmm. So again, we sit here and we go over it, and it's a 50-50 ball to me for Michigan State. That's the only way they can win this game. And it's not sitting here like making bulletin board material or anything. It's just a pure fact. These two teams are on different trajectories entirely. So let's talk about impact players and X factors and who ultimately is going to make a difference in this game on both sides of the ball. Let's go with two per side, one per side of the ball per team. And I'll start with Michigan on offense. And I think it's obviously Blake Corum. I mean, last year with Kenneth Walker and this year is Blake Corum. I thoroughly believe that. And I think Blake Corum is one of those kinds of dudes, man. Like we've talked with him a ton this year from a media standpoint. He's always been a good talker and always has made his way to the podium with media stuff over the last couple of years. And he's just one of those guys that I think he's gone to bed at night. Now we all know the story. And if you don't, once Michigan got home last year from East Lansing after the loss, the first thing Blake Corum did was get off the bus and go to the weight room. And that kind of shows the kind of guy he is. But I think in a game like this, he's lost sleep over the fact that Kenneth Walker single-handedly won that game last year. I think the offense did everything it could. Now, granted, Corum had the fumble from JJ, right?
Yeah.
Well, who's that quarterback? It just feels like one of those games where these guys they feel like they were the problem last year in this game, namely JJ and Blake. And I think that together being the stars of this game or stars of this team this year offensively, now granted, there's a million other things that go into winning a game and playing a game. But if you don't, I thoroughly believe those things resonate and are primary factors of motivation in this game. So I think it's the Blake Corum game offensively. Who do you see as an impact player offensively? I know it might be Blake anyway, but if not, who do you see and why?
Well, I mean, my first choice would have been Blake, of course, but I think JJ McCarthy is mine. Michigan State is going to try and limit Blake Corum as best as they possibly can. And there's going to be opportunities where, they're going to practically beg JJ to, beat them with his arm. And I think he's fully capable of that. If he can avoid some of the wild mistakes that he had against Penn State, and I'd still consider that pass that he floated up the Corum against Penn State a mistake because he should have never thrown that ball. He was very fortunate to find a receiver, but if he can kind of control, his play and limit those wild throws, I think there's going to be an opportunity there for some big plays. It's just they have to hit on them. And so I think Corum is going to be, obviously Corum's going to be involved, but JJ McCarthy is going to be a big factor in this game. And, that very well could come down to whether, it makes or breaks a game. I mean, that goes for both quarterbacks too. I think, Peyton Thorne's success will really determine whether he'll be able to get the ball to his receivers. I think that's obviously a conversation for the defensive side, but it's very much the same way for McCarthy. There's a chance here for JJ to really cement his legacy as a guy that people will remember for a very long time if he finds, an immense amount of success against Michigan State on Saturday.
No doubt about it. This game and his team kind of runs through JJ and just, I think, who he is and everything as a leader, similar to K last year, where he wasn't a captain, but has kind of pseudo become one. Granted, such is life as a Power 5 quarterback, right? It's kind of what you're expected to do in that position, no matter the level. So before we go on to defensive impact players, make sure you guys go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube if you're watching it right now. Do us a favor, go hit the plus sign and get that number bumping. Go to our socials at Michigan Rivals on Twitter, Maize Blue Review on Instagram and TikTok. Now, defensively, we'll talk about Michigan State in a second, but we'll stick to Michigan here with impact players. Defensively, I think that I'm going to go with more than one, or I would like to go with more than one, but in spirit of all the conversation I brought up earlier and have kind of throughout the week regarding linebackers and coverage, I'll talk about Junior Colson. I think he's as talented as any linebacker in the conference, right? Like intangibly, like he brings everything to the table from a physical perspective. And he's really become a leader of the team. We've seen that since last year. So I think all of those things are there for him. I just think instinctively he has to get like worlds better in the past game. And, he's shown the ability to do it. It's not like Junior Colson isn't good. He's very good. He's very talented. He's just got to kind of iron some things out here. And this is a perfect get right game for him. And I think he had one against Penn State. They played well against Penn State, but let's not lie to each other. Penn State's game plan sucked. Like they did not attack Michigan's linebackers at all. Like I would have loved to have been in that room as a guy who's never called a game before in his life, nor have I played football since the young ripe age of 14. But all the same, I think I could have went in there and dialed up something prettier than what James Franklin did 2 weeks ago in the Big House. And so with that in mind, I think we need to see some more Junior Colson, because what game does Michigan need a guy like Colson most? That's Ohio State, right? And that's the most win game, blah, blah, blah. So I think this is the get right game for Junior Colson to prove to himself and the staff that he belongs in the field, because we saw them pull him often against Indiana. I mean, he was almost not in ever on passing downs against Indiana. A team that passes as much as IU, Michigan showed it did not trust Junior Colson to be out there in obvious passing downs, going with Jimmy Rolder and Kalel Mullings and just trying to find someone who can stick for them at linebacker in coverage. And that just did not happen. But against Penn State, he played far more, dominated the snaps. I think Rolder only had 2, maybe 3 snaps in that game, and he was pushing 20 in the game before. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. But Colson is a guy that is going to determine a lot of things in that game, because he will be relied upon against the run and the pass equally more than any other player, in my opinion. And I think that's ultimately not the difference in the game, but I think that certainly, like, if his play is not good, the Michigan State is going to have more success than we're anticipating offensively. And if he plays well, then I think they're going to have even less success, which we don't expect them to have a ton of as it is. But if Junior Colson's able to play good, I think Michigan ultimately shuts them down. So who do you see defensively for Michigan standing out in this game?
Man, there's so many options. Junior Colson is a really good one. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I guess mine would be Mike Morris. I think he has the opportunity to be the guy on the defensive line, right? And he's shown that he's capable of it. But these type of games is where you cement yourself and your name in lore. And another really strong game from him typically would probably bode well for Michigan's chances on Saturday. I mean, and of course, you could pick any defensive back that you wanted out of that group, and it would be a good argument too. But I think, if the defensive line can create pressure, and if you watched the Michigan State versus Washington game, you saw what would happen if you get a guy in Peyton Thorne's face, or you try to make him do snap decisions. 9 times out of 10, he's going to throw a pretty bad ball and make some mistakes. So if Michigan doesn't give him time to throw in the pocket, again, I think it bodes well for Michigan's chances. The less time for plays to develop, the better it's going to be for the Michigan defense. And I really think Mike Morris is key to that. And Mozzie Smith as well. He's going to get a ton of attention, and I'm sure there's going to be double team opportunities for Morris as well. But Michigan's got to get a consistent pass rush in this game. And if they don't, and that doesn't mean that they're going to lose, but that just means the back half of that defense is going to have to work harder. And I think, we've seen plenty of games where the defensive line was so dominant that the linebacker, it takes less stress off everyone. It takes less stress off the linebackers. It takes less stress off the corners, the safeties. So I think, a dominant, it doesn't even have to be dominant, a very good pass rush that's effective, I think will be key for the Michigan defense. And if it ends up turning to dominance, then we're talking about a big time win for Michigan here. But yeah, I think it really starts with the defensive line and works its way out from there.
All right, so we are going to dive into briefly here Michigan State and what they're going to bring to the table offensively and defensively before we wrap up the show. Offensively, I think we can both agree. Do you think it's going to be a combination of Thorne and Reed, or do you want to pick one of those two?
Yeah, Thorne, Reed, Keon Coleman. I mean, they're not going to do it in the rushing game. I would be shocked if they had a successful rushing attack.
I think it's going to be I think they're going to run into a brick wall. It's going to be like that scene in Harry Potter where he tries to go to 9 3/4 and he just runs right into the brick wall. Honestly, like that just we could sit here and talk about how this game is going to break out, but all signs point towards being a bad day. Well, we already mentioned, I think it's the defensive line for Michigan State defensively. We can agree on that. I mean, those two things seem evident, right? How do we see this game shaking out? Where am I at with it? I mean, Michigan is a really good team. I think Paul Feinbaum, I cannot believe these words are coming out of my mouth. I think Paul Feinbaum made a good point the other day on ESPN. He said that Michigan is just a team that won't go away no matter what he or anyone else says. And that's a really good way to describe Michigan because they have been – we got to think about this, guys. And I know that they don't care about what people think about them, so don't think this is like a motivational tool for me to say or anything. But, like, Michigan's been counted out since November of probably October of 2020. People are you guys got to believe this, or you can believe it or you don't have to believe it. There are still people out there that think this is the same program that it was in 2020. And there are still people hawking that last year was a fluky year for Michigan. I feel like now at this point, especially after the Penn State blowout, we've seen that corner turn far more than ever before this season and really over the last year. And now, granted, Michigan beat Ohio State last year, won the Big Ten championship. But after that Penn State game last 2 weeks ago, you're talking about, let's see here, 19. So Michigan's won 17 of 19 now. Dating back to last year. So 17-2 in their last 19 games. They haven't lost at home since the war. I mean, they've been winning inside the big house since like the beginning of time, it seems like, under Harbaugh. They don't often lose there. Outside of 2020, I'd love to get the home record compiled. But again, I mean, they're undefeated this year, undefeated at home. So how do I see this game shaking out? Well, Michigan's at home, and Michigan is literally like, they're impossible at home. No, if you can go beat Michigan at home with this team, and I'm talking post 2020, guys. Like, I'm talking This program in 2021 and 2022 is night and day to what it was before. That is a credit to the new coaching staff. That's a credit for Harbaugh doing some of his own self-exploration and you know, this, that, and the JJ McCarthy, this, that, and the other thing, right? But this, and I get it, Michigan State is weird, and this game is weird, and there's things in the air, and anything can happen. But Michigan at home against an inferior opponent under Jim Harbaugh is an automatic cover. I think Michigan rolls. I don't want to sit here and act like it's not. The popular thing is going to be, well, I think it's going to be a close game. Well, I think Michigan State's going to play them tough because they do every year. Mel Tucker is 2-0 and this, that, and the other thing. And while all of those things are true, Michigan is like just so much better than them this year. Like it is. I don't think it's been like this yet. I understand Michigan was way better than Mark D'Antonio's 3-9 team in 2016. And you can make the argument that this team is more talented than that team. And in 2019, Michigan was a lot better than Michigan State too. But I think this is your biggest difference. I think this is your biggest contrast yet between the two teams under Harbaugh. Michigan is playing man ball. They're playing disciplined. They're out scheming the crap out of teams every week like they have since last year. And they're just better. When they're playing teams that they're better than, they're running through them. It might take some time, right? Like it did against Indiana, like it did against Iowa, or like against Iowa, it might start hot and then kind of settle in, right? But either way, Michigan executes their game plan really well. Their scripted drives have gone really well. And Michigan State's just the opposite, man. They're just like spinning around and hoping for the best. Like the Wisconsin game was won and lost by both teams 10 times before the game finally ended. Those were just two bad teams playing hokey pokey until there was a winner. So I think Michigan rolls personally, and I think they score a lot of points. I think they're pissed off. I think it's revenge. I think it's all the edges in the world. It just feels like one of those things where it's like the jack in the box is slowly turning, and I don't know who's going to come out. JJ, Blake, defense, whatever it might be. But Michigan is a jack in the box ready to scare the shit out of Michigan State on Saturday, in my opinion, and win by like 30.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I just don't see it this year. I mean, Michigan is, like you said, Michigan is so much better than Michigan State from up and down. I mean, you can make an argument that Michigan State has a better punter, and I probably agree with you. No offense to Brad Robbins, he's fantastic, but Michigan State's punter is probably better. But that's it. Like maybe we rely too much on paper and not enough on just, you know, the magic juju that Michigan State seems to bring every year to this Michigan game. But, you know, the facts are this: Michigan is the better team. And if they end up losing this game on Saturday, it's an abject failure. And, you know, that falls directly on Jim Harbaugh. But I just don't see a situation where Michigan loses this game from, as you said, from everything that you mentioned, from last year to a game that Michigan thoroughly outplayed Michigan State, aside the fact that, you know, Kenneth Walker exists. Take him away, and that game is completely different. But, you know, a loss is a loss. And I just think that this team is going to come in far more prepared than ever before, and they're ready. Like as you said, they're ready to take this to a new level and finally, you know, not necessarily slay the dragon, but, you know, get over this mental hump of, you know, losing to an inferior Michigan State team. And they were inferior last year, and they were inferior in 2020, but, you know, somehow they still managed to win. I just don't see this happening. And I do think Michigan rolls, and I've got them winning around, you know, 31-17-ish. That's kind of my prediction. You know, I think Michigan State will score late, but, you know, I don't think the score is going to reflect of what we will see on the field on Saturday. I just think Michigan up and down the roster is just so much better. You know, they'd have to play their worst football of the year, you know, to make this interesting. And I just don't see that happening when they've got so many goals in front of them that they want to achieve. And this one is number one on their list right now. Michigan State, beat them. Next one, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten, go to the playoff, win a championship. And this is number one on their list. And in order to get to the last three, they got to do the first one. And I think they've really grasped that idea. And I just think, I just don't see a situation where Michigan loses on Saturday. And, maybe this will come back to bite me in the end, but it'll be an abject failure if Michigan doesn't walk away with a win on Saturday. I mean, that's not a hot take, and that's not, that's me pointing out the obvious. I think Michigan is better equipped. I said that last game against Penn State. I think Michigan is better equipped, and their weapons are far better. And that Michigan is just going to have to play the complete opposite of what it's done all year in order to lose this game. I mean, that's it. That's it.
That is the synopsis of the game. That is everything you need to know about Michigan and Michigan State before Saturday. We will talk to you again tomorrow. Dennis Fithian's Afternoon Live. Good afternoon, Michigan football. Is that what are we calling it? Yep. Good afternoon, Michigan football. Right. All right. That'll be tomorrow at 1 p.m. Make sure you stay locked into the YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And then we'll also have Sharpening the Edge tomorrow. If you guys like sports betting and you're interested in what to bet on over the weekend, we talk about the NFL and college football at large. We predict Michigan. We usually do Michigan and Michigan State separately. Obviously, they're playing together this week, so we'll do that game. We'll talk about the Lions game, and then we'll break down 3 of our picks from NFL, NCAA, and a bunch of other stuff. It's an awesome show. Make sure you check it out. That is tomorrow at 2:45 p.m. But as far as Hail to the Podcast goes, that is it for us today. Appreciate you guys tuning in and joining us. It has been tremendous previewing one of the greatest rivalries in college football.
Yeah.
Michigan and Michigan State, year in and year out, despite the records. So hopefully it's another classic. Hopefully it's not a blowout. Hopefully we get some good football. But it's sure looking like one more than the other. For Josh Henschke, I'm Brandon Justice. Thanks for listening. Make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at Michigan Rivals. All other social media, Maize Blue Review. Come join us, michigan.rivals.com. Sign up today. The promo, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, you can get 50% off your first year. We'll be 1 year old on November 1st. So to celebrate, we're going to be offering 50% off your first year. If you use the promo code MBR1, the letter 1 year. And yeah, you'll get 50% off a 1 year. So you can hang out with us on the message boards, talk some football and upcoming basketball season. It's getting here quick. It's that time of the year. So yeah, would love to have you.
Yeah, we cover all angles at MBR. Everything is covered. Football, basketball, recruiting on both sides, hockey, baseball, women's basketball, all women's sports in general. We do a lot of the Olympic sports too. We really cover it all. And the message board is awesome if you're interested in joining in with some Discord with other Michigan fans and joining our community. So we've got it all. Community, intel, feature stories, YouTube, as you can see, the video content, the podcast content. It only gets better when you come and join us at michigan.rivals.com. Find out the inside info on your Wolverines and everything else involving the Wolverines athletics covered at large over at MBR. So come join us today. We'll talk to you next week for HTTP, but make sure you tune in tomorrow and our post-game show on Saturday. And then, of course, we will have Rise to the Victors on Monday, dissecting what goes on in Michigan State on Saturday. So see you guys at kickoff. Enjoy your weekend and take it easy.